Now it's time for the final part of Simon and Malcolm's conversation with the legendary Dr. Barry Rose, in which the trio discuss the intricacies of running choral foundations and remember the advent of girl choristers in our great cathedrals. This is Three in Harmony.
Work at every level of church music, and it's been very special. So I put everything that I've done, and I've made loads of mistakes along the way,
haven't we all?
but Barking Parish Church was the place where, and for a while when I was at Barking, I was organist at St James's Garlic Hythe.
Oh yes.
And I was there for a while, and then I moved to Croydon, and my vicar at Croydon said you can't do Garlic Hythe as well because it was one Sunday a month. Yeah. So I stopped that, and a gentleman called Andrew Palmley took over from me, and he's still there, and he says that that's how he got into being an alderman and the whole politics of the city. Yeah. And in fact, recently we talked about the Royal College Organist does this sort of podcast at the moment, and I was reminded that he interviewed Andrew Palmley, and they asked him how he got into being an alderman and then Lord Mayor. And he said it was all down to the fact that he started off at St James's Garlic Hythe. And the interviewer said to him, well, how did you get the job at Garlic Hythe? And he said, well, there was this chap, I won't mention his name, but this chap that used to be the organist there, and one day he couldn't make a service. So he asked me if I could play for it. And I said yes, and I did. And then he said, and he still owes me 20 quid. And then I quit, and the rector liked him, so he got the job, and he's still doing it to this day.
He's still doing it to this
day. 40 years later. So.
It's funny, there was a link between St James's Garlic Hythe and Norwich School, which is where I used to teach when I was at Norwich, in that every year we used to go and do a special service for the Worshipful Company of Dyers.
Oh,
and it was always in St James's Garlic Hythe. And then in the evening we used to have a special dinner at their hall, where they always ate swan, and they're one of the very few livery companies that's allowed to eat swan. I think the vintners are allowed to as well. But I always remember those services. It's a beautiful church, though.
Lovely church, a lovely organ too.
Lovely organ, yeah.
This is D-Y-E-R-S, not D-I.
The Dyers.
I mean, the thing about us, of course, we started in the days when choirs were not conducted.
Yes, of course.
I mean, in Hampstead, we just sang, and Martin played the organ. I don't know if you recall how all this began. I mean, it's the norm, isn't it? Now the choirs are directed. But the reason some of those evensong broadcasts I still have recordings of were so bad was because the audience just sat up there and the choir just sang. Is it a good thing the choir is conducted or not? I don't know. It was started in the 50s, wasn't it?
Yeah. I mean, I think my take is that I think overall it is a good thing. I mean, I think that coupled with the fact that we know so much more about the voice today, and if you direct choirs, you've got to actually know about the voice rather than just. But having said that, I do think there is a place for non-conducted choirs, because as we all know, for example, singing the Psalms. If you look across and you engage with your counterparts on the other side, a good choir should be able to start a psalm without any conducting or anything. You just you watch, you listen, you sense the inhalation of breath, and you all start. And I do remember at my short time at Jesus, where we had some very good singers, that with the chapel choir with the sopranos on top, I used to get them to do that all the time and just sort of stand there and just get on with it. And sometimes you watch Kings, you go to Kings sometimes, and they just beat across the men.
Yes.
And it's so together, it's so wonderful.
That's fine if you have rehearsal time.
Well, that's the other side.
Who work on, a wing and a prayer,
which
having to do, which we all have done. Look, I'll get you through this. I'll tell you even by my upbeat, whether it's loud or soft.
Yeah.
I mean, when I visit choirs, I do that thing that you suggested with psalms, but I make them turn the other way. I make them face the wall.
Well, there
now
you go.
Start.
Yeah.
And musical radar has to kick in.
But it does.
Because there's no sight at all. But it was. Do you know who started all this? I mean,
It was probably you.
No, it wasn't. No, everybody thinks it was me. I had to do it at Guildford because the choir would never have started. It was so new. I mean, there was one morning when I played the introduction to the Stanford Jubilate in B flat. Do you know, so it goes dum bum 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 bum. Oh, be joyful. Nothing happened. Oh, dum 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 dum. Somebody start, please. It wasn't me. It happened years before me. It was Michael Howard at Ely, who went to Ely Cathedral, and I think he decided the only way the choir was going to get better was if he stood in front of them and G'd them up a bit. And Stanley Vann then did the same at Peterborough.
Oh yeah, he had a very fine choir.
And his was the choir we all admired.
Yes,
we all thought this was the great choir.
Yes.
When you said that he started the Jubilate and nothing happened, it just flashed across. It's got nothing to do with what you were talking about. And I remember a friend of mine talking about Sidney Watson, Christchurch, Oxford.
Yes.
And my friend sang in the choir with him. And he told me this story about an evensong once, and they were doing Stanford in B flat Magnificat. And Sidney was told that there would be an installation of canons immediately after the first lesson. So they would finish the first lesson, then there'd be this installation of canons, and then they would sing the Magnificat. But he unfortunately forgot that there was going to be an installation of canons. So as soon as here ends the first lesson, and he goes chord, and nothing happens. And he carried on for about a whole page, just singing the Magnificat, and the choir just standing there. And apparently he then appeared over the top of the curtain and said, "Is anything the matter?" That's what I love about church music, when things go wrong.
There are many stories that can be told.
Sorry, I interrupted.
Maybe I'll save those for another time. I mean, well, you didn't conduct your choir at Jesus, I presume. You were organ scholar.
No, because actually when I was there, I was the only organ scholar.
Oh, gosh.
So I did manage, I think in my second year, to get somebody who had an FRCO who was actually doing a teaching qualification at the same time. And I managed to get them in. But I think in my first year, certainly my first term, I
played everything.
Just played everything.
And Warwick?
Well, no, I did have an assistant. In fact, I had a gentleman called Kevin Bowyer.
Oh my goodness!
Who I used to sometimes go and play voluntaries, and he never meant it like this, but he would say, "I'd be practicing. I played voluntaries." He'd go, "I remember playing that at school." Because he used to play all this absolutely crazy stuff, you know. And so, so I've always been terribly at Croydon as well. Carl Jackson was my assistant at Croydon.
So you've always had...
I've always had good assistants. I've always been able to conduct the choir, And at Salisbury, obviously, David Hall's.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, and I've always been very, very lucky. And then great organ scholars at Jesus.
Yes. When you were at Salisbury, because you only had 6 men, didn't you?
Yes.
What did you do if somebody was ill? Did you have deps, or did you just operate with 5 men?
Oh no. Well, let's get into the real world. Even places like Salisbury, things go wrong. But we did have deps, and you were only supposed to. The basic rule was you were only allowed to have 1 absence. So you needed 5 regulars and 1 dep. But it didn't always work like that, and there was one famous occasion. My day off was a Thursday, and it always seemed to happen on Thursdays. And one of the tenors asked one of our regular deps whether he could fill in for him, which he said he would. And then the other tenor asked the same bloke, forgetting. And this chap who was a bit of a sort of airhead, but he agreed. So both tenors were going out for this one guy, and then the bloke who was supposed to be doing it forgot to turn up.
Oh no!
So there were no tenors at all. And it turned out, and my assistant who was running it then, who now is the director of music, he was really quite tough about these things. And it turned out that one of the tenors, Hugh Hetherington, was in the barbers. He'd gone to have his hair cut. And David sent somebody round to the barber. And he came, and he got him to come out halfway through the service with his hair. He had quite long hair, and his hair was half gone. But that, I mean, it was risky with 6 men, but we had quite a good depth list, and so most of the time it did work. And you know, on the occasions when in those days we put the boys and the girls together, we then had to get another 6 men in. So.
Yes, so for big concerts.
Big concerts we'd have
go
both choirs.
12 men.
But it was at a time, because you and I were both, you were at Wells when I was at Salisbury, and we were at the sort of vanguard of people worrying about the boys' tradition.
Yes,
and, you know, we had the Salisbury girls and the Wells girls. Oh, what are those guys going to do? Are they going to mix the choirs together? So, you know, we were never allowed to mix them together, and we didn't want to mix them. And I found it almost quite insulting that people would suggest that we were going to let that tradition go. Scary as
Exactly. I was looking at someone, of course, who was at the start.
Your daughter was at the start.
Founder member.
Yes.
And they're extra at the time, because they already appointed 16 girls. And they took 2 extra ones on, of which Nicola was one.
Oh, right.
And the story of how that all began is shrouded in mystery, is it not? The foundation of the girls' choir.
I think so. Yeah.
Nobody quite knows. But
Richard Seal, my predecessor, was supposed to have come back from a Cathedral organist conference or something, and he was on the train and he was thinking.
I know a different version to that. Right. You see, now somebody who listens or sees this will correct me, but there was a programme on television which we're not allowed to talk about now, called Jim Will Fix It, with Jimmy Savile. And the head chorister's sister at Salisbury wrote to Jim Will Fix It saying, I want to sing in the Cathedral choir. My brother's in the Cathedral choir now, but it can't be done. Jim got the whole Salisbury choir up to a television studio, put this girl in the middle with the Cassigan surplice on. I remember seeing that on a Saturday afternoon. I finished Evensong at St Albans, and I'd gone home and switched it on, and there they were. And I thought that was the train journey home when Richard said, well...
Oh, well, maybe. I have never heard that story. No, I don't know. But it was interesting that he then had to, when he, you know, like you had to, he had to judge the ages and have people at different... And the other story that I always remember particularly that Richard told me was that in those days, the boy, he used to call the boys by their surnames, as we all did, you know. I was always called by my surname. But he felt that when the girls started, he couldn't call them by their surnames as well. And the headmaster at the time, whose wife was very involved in the starting up of the girls' choir, Richard sort of pleading with her, what do I do? What do I do? You know, I can't. And she said, absolutely, you've got to call them by their Christian names. And so when they started, the girls were called by the Christian names, and the boys were still called by their surnames. But very quickly, that had to change.
But Nicola said that created a few problems because there were two or three Nicolas.
But then it's so interesting because I remember, because when I was a chorister and my brother, who's younger than me, he was also at St Paul's, so I became Lowell May and he was Lowell Mai. But I remember friends from choristers coming to stay with us at home, you know, my house in Bristol, and we still called them, you know, whoever, with their surnames. We didn't call them Malcolm or Barry, it was just Rose and Archer. I say Archer, let's go outside for a spot of croquet.
Bunter, isn't it? I say Bunter, isn't it? Billy Bunter thing.
That's the way it was.
It was.
Just the way it was.
You know, so,
I must admit, Tony Crossland at Wells was very inspired by Richard starting the girls, and so 2 years after, in 94, he started the girls' choir at Wells, and it was an ideal place to start a girls' choir because the school was mixed. And of course the school went all the way through to 18, so the choristers could stay on in the school and so on.
Well, that was one of the frustrations at Salisbury, that Richard's model was that the girls had exactly the same experience as the boys.
Yeah.
So they were at the same age, and that at 13 they left.
Yes.
Well, the school stopped at 13.
Yeah.
And what started to happen, as you may remember, is that some of our girls used to come across to Wells because
Yes.
they could get another couple of years out
Yes,
of it.
absolutely. We had some very good choristers
And
as well.
Sophie Gallagher, people like that.
That's
And
right.
I mean,
Amelia Hughes.
Amelia Hughes,
Yeah.
who was singing with us 16 and stuff like that
That's
now.
right.
But I mean, so I found that very frustrating that just as they were really starting to get their voices going, they left.
Yeah.
And when I was at Sheffield Cathedral, we had a girls' choir, which was just from the local schools, and we ran that up to 18. And we had about 30 girls, and the sound of that... In fact, I have to say that when I went to Salisbury to this flagship girls' choir, and probably one of the reasons that I got the job was because I'd done a lot of work with girls' choirs, I was a bit disappointed with the girls' choirs because it was this rather little sound, and yet I'd had this Rolls Royce of 30 girls going up to 18.
Well, that's all to do with vocal development. Isn't
Exactly,
it?
and an 8-year-old girl in my Sheffield choir had a much bigger voice than an 8-year-old girl in the Salisbury choir because they also aped the sound
Of the older girls.
Yeah. And I remember you bringing the Wells girls to Sarum College to do a lunchtime thing.
Yes.
And I'm just thinking, oh my gosh, it was only 2 years difference, but the difference in sound was extraordinary.
Yeah.
Right, there we
Those
go.
were the days.
For a
Well,
minute.
I think
Yeah. Let's have a
we've
break.
had a great chat, and I think it's probably time for lunch. But I just want to thank you both very much indeed for this. It's been
Well, thank you. I mean, we haven't
absolutely
covered half of it, have we, really?
and
we need to get started now.
we need to get started. Well, we just arranged another session.
Yeah.
We find some
There's
nice.
a lot of stories that haven't been told.
Oh,
I think, and a lot of experiences too.
Yeah.
You know,
Well,
which
we worked out, didn't we? We've each got 3 cathedrals
to talk about.
to
Yes.
talk about,
Yes.
and we've got one in common,
Yes.
That's right.
and being St Paul's.
Of
Yeah.
course.
Yes, that's right.
God's railway station, wasn't it? William Morris used to call St Paul's God's railway station, and I can understand it when you've been in there in the daytime. You know, it's a tourist
Yeah.
trap, isn't
Oh.
it? Have you been in there at night time? Well, you have.
I've
obviously.
been-
I have
Yes,
too, yeah.
yes. It's a very different holy
Yeah.
place, isn't it? At night time.
It is. Yeah.
Very different place.
Was it Betjeman used to say that Bristol was the only city that had a railway station
Yes.
that looked like a cathedral and a cathedral that looked like a
Because it
railway
used to be very
station.
black at the cathedral, didn't it?
It did.
Yeah.
I think it's a bit unfair on the cathedral.
I think the
probably.
cathedral's absolutely wonderful.
It's a beautiful building. It really
Absolutely
is.
wonderful.
With a lovely acoustic.
Well, you can tell us all about Bristol another time.
Yes, absolutely.
And I'll tell you about some other ones.
We'll
That's a
wrap it up there. Thank you both.
Thank you.